Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. I am also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, our very special guest is Alice Heiman. She is the Chief Sales Energizer at Alice Heiman, LLC. And Alice is internationally known for her expertise in elevating sales to increase valuation for companies. Her clients have a B2B sale that has exceptional growth potential. And she spends her time strategizing with CEOs, company leaders, and their sales leadership to build the strategies that find new business and grow existing accounts. And that's her passion. That's why she does this. And her clients love her spirit and the way she energizes her sales organizations. I know that our audience today will love her passion as well. And she's a host of the popular podcast Sales Talk for CEOs. She dedicates a lot of her time to local entrepreneurs. She teaches at the University of Nevada in the entrepreneurship minor, which she helped to inspire. Alice also serves on the board of several growing companies to energize and elevate their sales. And when she is not guiding CEOs to elevate their sales, she can be found hanging out with her family, walking, snow skiing, sailing in Lake Tahoe, volunteering in the community, or reading a book in her backyard. So welcome, Alice.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that rich introduction. I really appreciate it, Wendy.
Well, my pleasure. And since you helped me with it, it was even a bigger pleasure.
I always say if you want a good introduction, write it yourself.
Absolutely. I had one of my very first speaking engagements when I started my business. Somebody introduced me. I didn't give an introduction, and they said something like, well, she's here because none of you can sell. And then he left the room. So after that, I started writing my own introduction.
There you go.
There you go. So let's begin at the beginning. What is the Alice Heiman story? How did you get into your field? How did you start doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. And some people who have heard me on other podcasts may know that I didn't start out in sales like many of us, but I actually started out as an elementary school teacher. So it is a bit of a windy road to get where I am today, but I did graduate with a degree in special education and elementary education. And then I got a master's degree in education, which gave me a reading specialist credential. So here I was on a path to educate children. And I did that for about 13 years before I went into business. Now, little secret, some of you may know, is my last name, Heiman. Yes, I am related to Miller Heiman. So my dad is Steve Heiman, his partner, Bob Miller. They started that company while I was in college. So I did have some understanding of what the sales world was like because I grew up with a father who was in sales and then a sales leader and then a VP of sales and then, the head of all of sales for North American van lines globally. And then he started Miller Heiman. So I'm not a foreigner to sales exactly, Wendy, even though I was teaching. So I did end up working for Miller Heiman for just about 3 years. And that is how I got into sales. But I actually had a little foray into sales while I was teaching. because I wrote a business plan and opened a business that was a resource center for parents and teachers to help their children with literacy. So I had a little business and I wrote the plan, got it funded, and ran that business for a number of years. So that was selling too, right? And so I had a little foray into it there. But yes, so that's how I got into sales, from teaching to my own business to working with Miller Heiman and helping some of the largest companies in the world to sell.
Well, it seems to me, after my 25 plus years working with salespeople, being an elementary school teacher would be the perfect background.
So here's a funny little side story, Wendy. When I first went to work for Miller Heiman, so my dad had purchased the company from Bob. They owned it together, and then Bob exited, and my dad and stepmom were running the company, and they asked me to come work for them. And they did not ask me to come work for them because I was good at sales, obviously. They wanted me to build curriculum, right? Because I was a teacher. So that's why they hired me. So eventually, after I had restructured this curriculum, I was like, I need to teach this so I can see how it goes. Right now, also, I had been teaching adults for 8 years while I was an elementary school teacher, because I taught graduate level courses for teachers. So I wasn't unfamiliar with standing up in front of adults and training them, but I hadn't trained this particular curriculum, which was around sales. And so my dad was like, okay. But he said, Alice, teaching salespeople is not like teaching kindergarten. And I said, okay, okay. But then I thought to myself, well, how does he know? He's never taught kindergarten. Of course, I had never taught salespeople. So after starting to teach salespeople, what I realized is it's a lot like teaching kindergarten, Wendy.
I believe that. I believe that 100%.
I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here. I'm just saying it's so similar in so many ways. It was so helpful to me. You've got learners who some are anxious to learn and some are not so anxious to learn. You have curriculum that needs to be dosed into small bites so that people can comprehend it, but not just comprehend it. They have to be actually able to do it. So those pieces were the same. And so it really helped me deliver the content in a way that the learners could absorb it and then go use it.
Yeah. And the thing that's very interesting to me about what you're saying, because my background was I was a ballet dancer. And when you're a ballet dancer, the teacher or the choreographer tells you what to do and you do it. You do not say, I can't do that. That won't work for me. Wouldn't it be better to do it this other way? You just follow direction. Ballet dancers are really good at following direction. And it was such a surprise to me when I started my business and started working with people who were not dancers, to find out that they weren't always so good at following direction. And I had to find another way to explain, to get them to understand, to trick them maybe into executing. And so that's very interesting to me. And it seems we have some commonalities, even though I was not an elementary school teacher.
It's that behavior change, really, right? That's what it's all about. So people call it change management, right? But what has to change? The people, right? So you're going to put a new process in place. That's wonderful. Now what has to change is the people, and their behavior has to change. And just like in dancing, your behavior has to change so that you can do the dance the way it was meant to be done by the choreographer's direction, right? And in sales, we have to change our behavior to conform to the way the buyer wants to buy and help them along their journey, right? So it's really not so different at all.
Not at all. So I want to ask you, because I was poking around your website a little bit earlier today, and you were talking about how CEOs prevent sales. And I found that to be very interesting. So could you share for all of our listeners some of the ways that CEOs prevent sales?
Well, at first blush, I don't think there's any CEO who will stand up and just say, I prevent sales, because no CEO wants to prevent sales, right?
Right.
However, I have found that they do admit it very quickly once I start talking to them about it. So if you start to think about what are some of the ways that a CEO prevents sales, it may not necessarily be their own behavior, but it may be the behavior they allow in an organization. So, but let's start with what are some behaviors of a CEO that could prevent sales. The very first one is mindset. So what is mindset? It is my thoughts that lead to my actions, right? So my thoughts about sales and sellers and customers, all those thoughts that I have, those actually come out of my mouth and they shape my behavior. So if a CEO doesn't come from a sales background, or, maybe has some sales experience as a seller, but not as a person who has orchestrated all of sales in some way, they may not completely understand what sales really is and what needs to be done. Now, over the many, many years that you and I have been in business, the way that we sell has changed, but not as much as the way that the buyer has changed. And so the mindset of a CEO thinking that the way we sold 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago or 3 years ago before the pandemic, thinking that that will still work. That's a mindset that could be preventing sales. And let's just take it down to a real tactical example. This CEO believes that cold calling, which you are the queen of, right?
That is correct.
Cold calling alone, the way that they used to do it, work. Just make more calls. Just make more calls. Just send more email, right? Just get some more SDRs. Well, okay, more sometimes works, but what we need to do now is better. So I'm not saying they shouldn't have a mindset that salespeople cold call, but they have to have a mindset that people need to cold call differently than they did in the past, and they have to do it better than ever, right? It's not just more calls, it's let's do them better. Let's figure out what's working and let's use that. And there are, as you know, better ways to make cold outreach. We can't rely on what worked in the past. Let's face it, when you and I were young and selling, people answered the phone. And
Yes.
it's harder to get them to answer the phone now. So it's not that it doesn't work. It's just that it used to work really, really well. In fact, you and I could literally knock on the door of a company, walk in the door, and actually talk to a receptionist or something. I mean, doesn't really happen much anymore. So if you have this mindset about the way sales works from yesteryear, right? That mindset is going to hold you back. It's going to hold your team back, and it is going to prevent sales. So we have to start with our own mindset as a CEO and ask ourselves, what preconceived notions do we have? What are we having? What are we perpetuating that may not be working anymore? And everything has to be up for grabs. We have to examine it and say what works and where can we get information to help us prove that these things will work or these things won't work anymore, so that we have data to make good decisions with. So that's one example of a CEO preventing sales, right? But they could also be preventing sales by, for example, allowing legal to take 3 to 6 weeks to put a contract through. In that time, companies can decide to go with somebody else. Companies can decide, oh, well, it's not that important. We just won't make any decision at all right now because you've held this up. They can, have a change of heart, whatever it is. The salespeople complain about it. The sales leaders complain about it, but the CEO doesn't make the necessary changes to legal or to the contracting or to whatever needs to be changed so that it's an efficient process that helps the customer buy. That's another way they could be preventing sales. And I could go on and on, but those are a couple of good examples.
I'm wondering if you've ever encountered this, because when you said mindset, what jumped into my mind was the sales leaders that I have met along my journey that will say to their sales team that prospecting is a necessary evil, so you just need to do it. Just learn to handle the rejection, go do it. And I always think to myself, how on earth do you think these people are going to succeed in building a great pipeline when they think it's such a horrible thing that they have to do? It baffles me.
Exactly. CEOs need to check the mindset of their leaders, right? All of the leaders, because again, not just the sales leader, but maybe the CFO or maybe the CMO has a really wonky mindset around sales, and that is not helping everybody else have a great mindset around sales. This is what I say about prospecting. Your prospects are depending on you to find them. Let's go out and do that, right? That's the mindset we need. Because if I need something and I don't even know you exist, but I need something to solve my problem, I'm hoping you will find me so you can help me solve. And I can't take full credit for that. My friend Diana Guerin used to always talk about prospecting, and just as you said, Wendy, the mindset around prospecting, and that's what we came up with as the cure for that bad mindset. It's like, look, your prospects are depending on you to find them. Now, sometimes when you find them, they're not ready to buy. That's okay. Keep in touch with them because someday they will be. And if you've targeted your audience properly, everyone that you touch while you're prospecting will need to buy what you sell at some point. They may not need it right now, and they may not buy it from you, but they need what you have if you've targeted your audience properly. So you will be talking to people who care about the problem that you solve. So as you do any kind of cold outreach, if you understand these prospects and you understand what their problems are, and you can show that you can solve and bring advice and insight, they will stay with you and give you the opportunity, right? But there's no promise that they're going to buy from you. But if you're talking to the right people and you're doing it the right way, there's a high likelihood, right, that they will buy from you.
Yes. One of my first clients before we started Salesology, before we started the sales training company, I used to do business development for clients. One of my first clients was a printer. Her name was Tamar. And Tamar would say to me that she wanted me to make appointments with all of the prospects that were incredibly loyal to their printers and that would swear up and down that they would never ever change. Because Tamar would say to me, one of these days, their printer is going to screw up and I'm going to be waiting in the wings and I'm going to get that account. And you know what? She was right.
Yes, absolutely. People need to have many choices. They need to have a backup plan. They need to have somebody to call on when their current vendor is just over capacity and can't help them. If you are only as a salesperson having the mindset because your leader let you have this mindset, right? The mindset is, oh, you can't buy from me, goodbye, right? If you have that mindset, you won't be one of those sellers that exceed their quota. You get to be a seller that exceeds quota. One, because you have a team around you with the right mindset who lifts you up and supports you, right? And two, because you know that humans want to talk to other humans and want to have a conversation about something that matters, not just talk about products and services and, no, I don't need that. Can you sell me this? No. It's a conversation that gets them excited. And they want to continue that conversation until they are ready to make a purchase. So when we have that mindset, right, then great things happen. And so that does start with a leader. It does start with a CEO, and it starts with all of the senior executives and the people who manage the salespeople and the go-to-market team. Because let's face it, today, lone wolf selling is out, right? We need a team. We need the subject matter experts. We need those sales engineers. We need those customer success people. We need our senior executives to all gather around with us and meet the customer where they are and provide that exceptional experience that's going to get the customer to buy and then get them to become a loyal customer and be successful using whatever it was that we just sold them.
Yes. So I'm very curious, if you've got a CEO that has a mindset that is kind of getting in the way, how do you change that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have never met a CEO that didn't have a mindset that was getting in their way. And it's just something that, is natural, right? They don't realize it. And even the best CEOs who really love sales and support sales sometimes have some mindsets that are getting in the way. So really, sometimes I just have to sort of point out how ridiculous it is. Like, I'll give you an example. And again, I know I'm not knocking cold calling, but it's just an easy one to pick on because people do it so poorly, as you know, or you
That is
have
true.
a business. So I say to the CEOs, okay, you have 25-year-old, what you call SDRs, sales development reps, on the phone trying to book appointments for AEs, and you've given them a list of senior level people to call. Okay. Maybe you've even given them something to say, although I find a lot of times they didn't do that part, Wendy, as you know.
That is
didn't
correct.
give them the right words. And so they are dialing for dollars, basically, at this point. And 100 dials, maybe you get one live person to talk to you. I say to the CEO, this is very inefficient. There are better ways to do this. But let me just ask you, how many calls do you take a day from an SDR who's trying to book an appointment for you with their AE? How many calls do you take like that per day? And of course, what do you think they say, Wendy?
They say none.
None. Now, think of the amount of rejection, right? You can't, first of all, people don't even answer their phones. CEOs, C-level people, senior vice presidents that are decision makers at companies don't answer their phones. They don't take cold calls. So what are we going to do about that, right? If you don't take them, why do you think others like you will take them? Now, some of them will. There are a small percent that will, right? And that's what we're banking on. So either you have to change who you're calling to call people who do answer their phones, or you have to think differently, right, about this. So when I say that to them, they go, you're right, that's absolutely ridiculous. They're like, okay, so what can we do instead, right? So how do we make this a working proposition instead of, a thankless job that churns salespeople at the rate of, 12 to 18 months, or maybe less. I don't know what it is right now. So that when I just point out to them what they're asking their sales team to do. And the other one is when I catch emails from their own salespeople that are all about them, all about their product, just me, right? I say, do you read the emails that your salespeople send out? Well, no, I don't. Oh, well, here's one that you should read. So you wonder why you're not getting the results. Here is an example of why. So they can change their mindset very quickly when they see evidence.
Yeah, and all of these things that you're talking about can be solved with better messaging, better emails, better processes, tracking what you're doing.
I mean, right? It's like, it's so simple to fix. It's almost mind-boggling, right? I mean, you identify it very quickly and it's so simple to fix. But here's another one, Wendy, that I think people don't think about. These young people who are making these calls have never had the experience of buying something other than maybe like groceries, or maybe some of them, if they're 25 to 27, 30 years old, maybe they've bought a car, right? That's probably the most expensive thing that they've purchased at this point in their life. Few maybe have purchased a home, but at that age range, probably not yet. And so they haven't made any real major purchases themselves personally. They have never been on a committee at their company to make a major purchase of software or equipment or any capital expense. So they've never been on a buying committee and they don't understand how people buy or how companies buy. Like at their own company, they wouldn't even know what the process would be to be able to go ahead and spend $100,000 or $500,000 on software. They wouldn't even know who to talk to at their own company. They know nothing about the buying process, right? In a B2B world. They don't know what the day in the life of their buyer is like because they're calling on people who are 10 or 20 years their senior, who have worked their way up an organization. Not always. Sometimes they're dealing with their own peers, but generally speaking, the people they're calling who are on these buying committees have more experience. They're older. They've had several jobs by now. They're further along in their career. And if you haven't been there, done that, how can you know what it is, right? And so they have nothing in common with these people and don't even understand what their day is like. And they don't understand that these people have a full-time job to do. And now they've also been asked to be on this committee to make a decision, to research and come to consensus and make a decision and buy something. They have no idea what that's like. Right? So it's like me calling a rocket scientist and trying to explain to that rocket scientist something that I know nothing about, right? I don't even know what a rocket scientist does all day. So it would be a silly conversation. And so if in our ability to change things, we can say, hey, let's have some better messaging. And hey, let's do this a little bit of a different way. And here are some words for the emails and the phone calls. And here's how you research these people to get to know a little better. And here's how you can use LinkedIn and all these other things, right? If we also took the time to help them understand how people in a company buy something and what process they go through and what that person's day is like. So if they're calling on an engineer who does prototyping for automobiles, like what is that person's day like? What do they do? I'm trying to sell them software to move them from prototyping to modeling. How would that impact them? Why would they want that or not want that? What would be the factors on which they would make a decision for something? If we spend some time teaching the salespeople these things, they'd be like, oh, okay, I haven't done that before. I haven't lived that before, but now I have a little bit of a picture of what it would be like to be doing that. And also being on a committee to make a decision. And I would understand better how this works. Imagine how those salespeople would now feel and how much better able they would be to use the messaging we gave them to start a conversation with someone who could buy from them.
Absolutely. And that's actually part of the process that we take everybody through when they're doing our programs to analyze all of that so that they can represent themselves and the company well when they're speaking with somebody that's 20 years older and a lot more, farther along in their career and really impatient, no time to talk.
Right. So, and understanding where that impatience comes from. Because if I'm calling you and I'm thinking, well, why don't you want to talk to me? It isn't that I don't want to talk to you. It's that I don't have very much time. And get to the point and tell me the message, so I can decide whether it's worth my time or not, right?
Yeah, don't ask me how I am and do I have time to talk, because the answer is going to be no.
No.
This is a perfect segue, actually. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsor. When I come back, Alice, when we come back, I want to hold your feet to the fire because I know you talk a lot about evolving customer behavior and all the things that had changed because of COVID and building strategies around the customer as opposed to around the thing you happen to be selling. So that's what we're going to come back and talk about. But we are going to pause for a moment for a word from our sponsor, Salesology 3X Appointments. You know how frustrating and stressful it is when you leave every sales meeting wondering if your sales team knows how to sell because they're not selling and all you ever hear from them are excuses. They blame your marketing, they say you need to do more social media, and they say you need a new website. You know something's wrong, but you don't quite know what it is. You're even starting to wonder if it's you. You don't have a lot of options. You could fire them all and just start over. That would be expensive. But you're really sick of waking up in the middle of the night wondering how to fix this. Well, imagine instead that you have an easy-to-use, replicable system that ensures that your team can easily schedule qualified appointments. And imagine that your team is excited and motivated. No more excuses. And do you feel good? Salesology 3X appointments can make that happen. If you're a business owner or a sales manager with an underperforming sales team, let's talk. Click on the link to my calendar in the show notes, schedule a time, and I look forward to meeting you. And we are back with Alice Heiman, who is the Chief Sales Energizer. Absolutely, Chief Sales Energizer of Alice Heiman, LLC. So, Alice, here's the question I have to ask you, because I was reading on your website all about evolving customer behavior. And you actually said this earlier in our conversation, that some of the things that maybe you and I did when we first started our business, they'll still kind of work, but the customer behavior has changed a lot. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So let's talk about what hasn't changed about customer behavior. Human beings go through a process to make a decision. We're wired to do decision-making a certain way. We have to first understand that we have a problem, right? Because otherwise we take no action. There's nothing to solve. So when we recognize that we have a problem, then we start to think, what are the solutions? Now, once I've decided that, and I've talked to the other people at my company, and we all agree there is a problem that needs to be solved, we're going to go searching for some solutions. One of them might be to do something internally. We have a team that could take on a project and could solve this problem for us. So we could build it, or we could go buy it, or maybe we decide after we talk it through, it's really not worth solving. We're going to do nothing, right? So we can build it, we can buy it, or we can just do nothing, status quo, remain the same. So we have to come to a decision as a group, right, that we are going to pursue a solution. So in my own part of that as a human, I have to go through the process that I have to go through to be completely confident that when I say we should take this solution, I feel 100% confident I can back that up and I am not going to lose my job over it, right? So I have to do whatever the things are that I have to do to get to this point where I say, I am confident that this is the right solution. I'll put my hat in this ring. Now, all the others are doing the same thing. So humans make decisions the same way they've always made decisions. Basic human psychology applies. What has changed is the way that we research things. Now, back in the day, and still today, I would say, Wendy, have you ever bought any software that will dedupe your database? And you say, oh, why, yes, Alice, I have. And I say, well, what did you buy? And, how did you find that? And then you tell me, and then I might go ask another friend, have you ever bought this kind of software before? And I'll try to get a few opinions from some friends. Now, back in the old day, I would also then go to the phone book because there was no internet, and I would look it up. And at that point, I would have to talk to a seller because there was no internet. So I would have to call somebody and have a conversation with them, and they would probably have to send me some information, or perhaps they would come to visit my company and then show me something in person, because that was the only way to do it, right? So the buyers still have to go through that same process, but now they can look at your social media. They can read G2 Crowd. They can go on your website, and then they can either see what they need or, unfortunately, not see what they need, which will either make them bounce off your site and go to somebody else, or it will make them form an opinion that is not helpful to you as the selling team to move them forward. So the buyers are left to their own devices for quite a bit of their buying journey, as we call it, to figure some things out for themselves. So in the old days, I was there on the whole journey to help them figure it out. Now I don't get there till a lot later. And in fact, some organizations like Gartner believe that buyers have taken 70% of their journey without the seller. So that means they have been researching, they have been asking around, they have been watching videos, they have been taking some action to learn what they can. Now, they may have formed some misconceptions along the way that make it harder for you. So now you've got a buyer who's done all this research on their own and digested this information and whatever misconceptions, right? So they've asked people, they've looked at your website, they've read some, reviews of your company and reviews of your products, and they've formulated these thoughts in their head, right? So now what do they need? Well, what they don't need is a discovery call where you ask them a whole bunch of questions that take them back to the beginning of the process. Now, I know that people teach sellers to do this, and I know that sellers need this information or they think they need it to move forward, but sellers are still doing things like BANT. Do you have a budget? Do you have the authority? Let me clarify the need and the timing. Well, today, right? Of course, this buyer has a budget or will get a budget. They have some authority, or they wouldn't even be talking to you, because remember, they've already done all this research. Somebody said, go out and find, right? So asking them those questions is just sort of irritating, actually. Now, the timing, yes, that's really important, because you do have to know how to satisfy their need within the time frame that they have, and you either can or can't do that. But to go through this, well, let me ask you a few questions. First of all, do you have a budget? I wouldn't be talking to you if I wasn't going to buy something. So you just asked me a stupid question. Okay. And we always say there's no stupid questions, but in this case, don't start with that. That's not okay. Do you have the authority? I'm talking to you on the phone. I have some authority. I may not be the final decision maker. Don't ask me that. Right. So we are using these old selling methods that are just irritating buyers. And that is why, again, the Gartner research says most buyers would like to have a rep-free buying experience, which is impossible, especially in a complex sale. You have to talk to someone. So if you think about what the buyers have done, then you have to think, how can I meet this buyer where they are? Now, how will I know where they are? I start with something like, you've stated that you have a need for this product. What have you done so far to help you find a solution? Okay, now I open it for conversation. Well, we talked to a few people. We did this. Oh, wonderful. What do you need next? Okay, now I can start. Well, I do have some insight for you on what others like you have done to solve this type of problem using our product and or others, depending on what or whatever. So, I can share that with you. Yes, I'd love to hear that. Okay. So we just have to move a different way. If you get a buyer who says, well, you're the first person I've called. Great. Then let's make sure we thoroughly understand what you're trying to solve before we go any further. Tell me, what's happened at your company that's made you start to look for this solution? How were you handling this before? What worked and what didn't about that? Great. Let me thoroughly understand this problem. And then I can move forward with, all right, here are some suggestions. There's us, there's these others. You probably want to do some more research. Let's talk about how that's going to go. And we're guiding them. And yes, eventually they're going to talk to you about the price. And eventually they're going to, if you do it well, bring in the others that you need to talk to. And they're going to tell you the timing. See, this is another little side story, but sellers are always worried about the close date. Why? Because people are putting pressure on them to put the close date in the CRM. Well, close dates come from customers, not quotas. How do you find out the close date? You simply ask them the timing for implementation. And once they have told you that, you can go backwards by mapping the whole process to get to the date that they need it installed or implemented or started, right? It becomes very simple to get the close dates. But somehow, again, we're missing all of this because we're using old sales techniques, methodologies to try to move the buyer through our process when they're like way ahead of us. So it's really just a matter of understanding where the customer is when you come in contact with them and helping them move forward from that point. And that will be different for every buyer that you encounter.
Well, you know what I think is interesting about what you're saying? I'm not sure that the process, the old process that you described, ever really worked that well. However,
you're right, Wendy.
Prospects were just a little bit more patient and would go through it with you. Whereas today, they're like, nobody has any patience.
Mm-mm. And they want to know why you have it, especially if you call them. Why haven't you researched my company? Why don't you know more about me? Why it's all over the internet, right?
Oh, yeah. 25 years ago, you could call up somebody and say, tell me about your company.
Exactly.
And you can't do that.
Well, I used to call the, main desk and get all of that download first, right?
Oh,
so
yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
I would try to, in the mail, right? I would order their 10K or their annual report and get it mailed to me, these beautiful glossy, papers. And I would read that. And then I would call the reception desk and ask questions and be as well prepared as I could. Again, there was no interview, but now there's no excuse. It's not even hard. It's everywhere. It's easy.
It is very easy. Agreed. So this has been such a great conversation, Alice. So will you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back?
I would love to come back, Wendy. This has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So in the meantime, where can our listeners find you?
Okay, I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn, but there's one caveat. You have to write me a message that said you met me on Wendy's show. Otherwise, I will not accept your connection request.
There you go.
I want to know that you heard us here and that you listened, and that is where you're coming from. So I'd also love it if you'd listen to my podcast, which is Sales Talk for CEOs. And that, of course, is on my website, aliceheiman.com, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Sales Talk for CEOs.
Okay, wonderful. And we are going to post all of those links in the show notes. So if you want to connect with Alice on LinkedIn and tell her that you met her on Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders, why, as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link, and do click on the link for Alice's podcast so you can listen to her podcast. And I want to thank everybody for being here and listening today to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And if you have found value in today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one sales leader, or one sales professional that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast, and please share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.